take a quick look at the car parked in your driveway. There's a really good chance it's a Japanese brand, right? Well, welcome to this explainer. We're going to completely unravel the fascinating and honestly tension-filled history of how those exact cars went from being seen as deeply resented economic threats to absolute beloved staples of the American highway. It's a massive story about a total shift in consumer preferences, fierce corporate rivalries, and the undeniable power of globalization. So whether you're a massive gearhead or just someone fascinated by economics and culture, this wild journey from intense animosity to total market dominance is absolutely going to change how you look at what you drive. Okay, I want you to listen to this visceral, first-hand recollection from an American auto engineer who actually lived through this era. He said, the Japanese were kicking the stuffing out of American autos. The American auto industry was fat and lazy. That quote perfectly captures the intense resentment and culture clash defining the 1980s auto industry. For decades, the Big Three in Detroit had this highly complacent attitude. They basically dictated to the consumer what to buy, what it would cost, and frankly, they didn't sweat long-term reliability too much. But suddenly, a new player rolls into town, completely upending the status quo and offering way better quality at a fraction of the price. So, to really understand how we got to this boiling point, we've got to look at the timeline. And surprisingly, Japanese imports started out as absolute flops. Back in 1958, Toyota and Nissan entered a Los Angeles car show. And honestly, their cars were so terrible on American roads that they basically just packed up and went home for a few years. But then, the 1970s hit, and everything changed. The first oil crisis in '73 and a second in '79 sent fuel prices absolutely skyrocketing. Suddenly, those massive gas-guzzling American cars were a huge liability. Consumers desperately needed small, fuel-efficient vehicles. Japanese automakers were perfectly positioned to deliver, eventually gobbling up a massive 21% of the total U.S. vehicle market by 1981. Now, this whole situation brilliantly illustrates two completely contrasting philosophies. While American automakers were kind of sitting back and being complacent, Japanese firms were actively evolving. The Japanese government and business leaders went all in on the methodologies of W. Edwards Deming. He was this American engineer who championed statistical process control. By using advanced mathematics for high-volume manufacturing, Japanese automakers figured out how to design and build a vastly superior product, and do it much, much cheaper. They weren't just getting lucky with the oil crisis, they were literally out-engineering their American counterparts right on the factory floor. Section 1. The 1980s American Backlash, an economic and cultural clash. Naturally, as American consumers flocked to these affordable, reliable vehicles, it triggered a massive, severe backlash across the United States. And this backlash was a really complex, volatile mix. You had legitimate economic fear over massive job losses for U.S. auto union workers. You had politicians struggling with the 1980s recessions, actively scapegoating Japan and accusing them of dumping cheap cars below cost. Plus, there was very real, lingering resentment from the older generation who had fought in World War II. For some, buying a Japanese car felt like an affront to American labor or even a betrayal of the country. This toxic atmosphere was so intense that it even boiled over into tragic violence, like the heartbreaking 1982 murder of Vincent Chin, a Chinese-American man beaten to death by auto workers who mistakenly thought he was Japanese. All of this tension pushed the U.S. to pressure Japan into capping their imports in 1981 through what were called voluntary export restraints, or VERs. This meant Japanese car imports were capped at under 2 million units a year. Now, think about this for a second. This posed a literal billion-dollar strategic question for Japanese automakers looking to grow. How on earth do you increase your profits if you are legally barred from increasing the total volume of cars you sell? Well, their solution was an absolute masterclass in corporate judo, right out of Sun Tzu's playbook. Since they couldn't sell more cars, they just decided to sell more expensive cars. They completely bypassed those export limits by inventing entirely new high-end luxury brands from scratch: Acura, Lexus, and Infiniti. They zeroed in on that $30,000 to $50,000 segment, offering performance and quality that equaled German heavyweights like Mercedes and BMW, but at a significantly lower price point. By establishing these brand new tangible and intangible values, Japanese automakers shockingly forced the Germans out of their comfortable premium market dominance. They literally turned a trade restriction into a massive financial victory. But to truly ease the political tension back in the States, Japanese companies executed a second huge pivot. They started investing heavily in what we call transplant factories directly on U.S. soil.
Honda was the pioneer here, opening a massive assembly plant in Marysville, Ohio in 1982. Nissan, Toyota, and Subaru quickly followed suit. By bringing the production directly into America's heartland, they completely bypassed import tariffs, insulated themselves from currency fluctuations, and, most importantly, started employing American auto workers. That move rapidly diffused the political hostility.
And the modern impact of those initial transplant factories, it's just staggering. Today, Japanese brand automakers operate 24 manufacturing facilities across 20 different states. They directly employ over 90,000 people. And when you zoom out and factor in their massive supply chain, they indirectly support 1.5 million jobs throughout the United States. What started out looking like a foreign invasion of imports has totally transformed into a foundational pillar of American manufacturing. So much so that these cars have almost entirely assimilated into American culture. The automotive design process is a perfect example of this. Think about this mind-bending fact. Today, vehicles like the ultra-sophisticated Honda NSX or the everyday Toyota Camry aren't just shipped over on boats. They are penned right in Southern California design studios by American designers, and they are assembled in places like Marysville, Ohio. They might be foreign brands, but they are incredibly American products. And this assimilation was so unbelievably successful that consumer preference completely shifted. By 2007, Toyota alone achieved 2.62 million vehicle sales in the US. That officially pushed them past both Chrysler and Ford, securing the number 2 position right behind General Motors. That metric really marked the official transition. In the eyes of the American consumer, Japanese automakers went from being seen as foreign threats to vital, permanent domestic economic drivers. Section 2. The Automotive Cultural Divide. US versus Japan Auto Markets. Okay, so this brings us to a really fascinating asymmetry in global trade. If Americans are out there buying millions of Japanese cars every single year, why do Japanese consumers almost entirely ignore American cars? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle lies in environmental juxtaposition. It really comes down to geography and urban planning. Traditional American vehicles are simply too large, too heavy, and way too thirsty to be practical in Japan's tightly packed cities like Tokyo or Osaka. The Japanese environment demands compact, highly maneuverable cars to navigate narrow city streets and deal with extremely limited parking. On top of that, fuel is significantly more expensive in Japan, making the super fuel-efficient compacts and hybrids that Japanese companies excel at an absolute necessity for local drivers. But, it's not just the physical roads keeping them out. American automakers have historically really struggled to adapt to Japan's incredibly strict local regulatory standards for safety and emissions. Any American car entering Japan often needs expensive modifications just to be street legal. Add to that a very strong sense of economic nationalism. Japanese consumers have this fierce loyalty to domestic brands that deeply understand their local needs and offer far superior local after-sales service. It's just a market American automakers haven't been able to crack because they haven't tailored their products to that unique cultural and physical landscape. Which really leaves us pondering this final thought as we wrap up this explainer. Japanese automakers literally fought tooth and nail for decades, navigating economic crises, fierce political backlash, and deep cultural divides, just to win over the American consumer. But as we enter the era of electric vehicles, the landscape is radically shifting all over again. With new American startups and shifting global supply chains leading the charge, will this hard-won American loyalty to Japanese automakers actually remain? Or are we about to witness another massive disruption in what we drive and who builds it? It's definitely a fascinating question to consider the next time you back out of your driveway. Thanks for joining this explainer, and we'll catch you in the next one.